Hey everybody, welcome back. Tim here at Doc's Autos. If you have not hit the like and subscribe button below, please go ahead and do that now. Today we are going over kind of a review of our Great Western Buildings shop. Kind of more of a tips and tricks, lessons learned, and probably something you should watch before you put up your own building. So here we go. So here's a list of things I've come up with from building our building here, either that I have found online, picked up on myself, or just by reaching out to the team at Great Western. They were very helpful and I think went above and beyond my expectations for customer support after a sale. So here we go. The first thing, I have a list. I actually wrote down a list for a change. So one of the items here is the Eave Struts. Way up here, and they are what our 18-inch overhang attached to, and you can see they are bolted on to the columns on the side. I'll drop another picture in here, what they look like. For me, it was very helpful to attach these on the ground before I erected everything, mainly because the Eave Struts were a little heavy to maneuver, especially if you're going to be up 16 feet in the air. I felt it just was a much easier process to assemble and bolt those all on the ground. Especially there was one that the holes were a little off size, so I was able to get that corrected before, of course, we erected that column. All right, another item that I came up with was kind of in prep and planning for the build. I laid out everything as best I could, grouped by whether they were the end wall columns for the side walls, the lean-to supports, and I kind of laid all those out near where they went on the building. I knew we'd move things around a little bit, but I tried to have things pretty well staged where they would be put up, so we spent less time running around looking for parts when it came time to building day. There are some instances like all of our purlins and girts, I kind of stacked those off to the back until we needed them, because that was just a little too much to have right up front here when we were building. But kind of plan about what you're going to build and where to lay things out. I think that was probably very helpful in terms of wise use of time. If you are doing a poured foundation or a perimeter foundation, that's what we did. You can see with the 1-foot stem wall here around the entire building, we had all of our templates for our anchor bolts that were called out in the design plans. Now those are not supplied by Great Western, and at least in my area, they are not supplied or fabricated by the concrete vendors. So we had to do that on our own, and I ended up just going out to aftfasteners.com and finding the threaded rod that was needed, as well as all the heavy bolts and the washers, and I just built up all these templates before the concrete guys were out here. So when they were here, everything went in seamless. I guess you don't need to put in templates if you want to sit and try and lay everything in the concrete and get everything leveled and even. You can do that. I've seen a few instances of that when I was doing some looking online earlier this year, but I think it's going to be to your advantage both in time savings and end result is to have those templates made. And I actually pre-drilled everything. I sunk all the anchor bolts into those plywood templates with the correct spacing for everything. So when the concrete guys were here, all they had to do was go and drop them in right in place where they go. All the measurements were labeled on the plans, so they don't need to do a whole lot of figuring out where this goes. They just need to look at the plans and read that out. And luckily, all of our anchor bolts went in perfectly. There was one of the columns for the lean-to in the back where a couple of them had tilted for some reason. The concrete guys came back out and fixed that right away for us, so there was no issue there. But overall, I think starting with a good set of accurate templates is going to really help get your end result to where you want it to be, where you don't have to cut off and re-drill any of your anchors, especially for your support columns. Another item I probably should have done ahead of time before putting on all the wall sheeting would have been to put in my entry doors. I only say that because when we went to put on the door trim, I had to trim these down about 3/8 of an inch to make sure that everything fit in this space here. If I had installed the doors and the door trim before I put on the rest of the trim and sheeting for the building itself, I wouldn't have had to do any trimming. And overall, I think it looks just fine. It's just kind of one of those lessons learned. And part of it for our building was just the availability of the doors. It would have been nice to have them when we started building when we started to put up the building, but they were not available. So we had to work with what we had, and that was no doors. So if you do have the ability to get the doors up front, especially if you're not purchasing them with your Great Western building, go ahead and make sure you have them and installed before you begin putting on your sheeting. Another tip I found along the way was for all of your cover trim for your windows or your overhead door openings. And there's a link I'll drop below here too for how to do that from the guys at Great Western. But up at the top where you see the two corners come together, it's wise to bend 1/2 inch or so from the top piece of cover trim over and down, so that if you have any short, if you cut this piece short at all, you won't see any of the galvanized steel showing through. You'll have that wrap around from the top piece of trim to cover it up. And I'll show you in the building itself where I did not do that, and it's quite apparent. This would have been the first window I put in before I found that little tidbit of information. And you can see here, I cut this flush and I did not bend it over. So you can see there's a little bit of the galvanized showing through, and a little bit over here. Just, again, this was the beginning of the trim work here, and I was not educated in that process yet. So as I went along and read a little more and did a little more research, I figured out, hey, I can wrap these corners over and it looks a lot cleaner. Let's go over to one of the last windows I did. There we go, right here. And you can see I wrapped up the bottom here, so you can see there's just a little, maybe an eighth or so short here, but you can see that since this bottom piece wraps up, you still see the brown cover trim under all the dust, and you don't see any of the galvanized. You can see a little better up on top here, maybe, if I zoom in, there we go. That looks like a good clean corner to me. So again, I think if there's anything you're not sure on trim work, any of the erection stuff, go ahead and call the guys at Great Western. They are very helpful and can look through the plans with you even from afar and determine what you need to do to get it done properly. So that's it for that cover trim. So another thing I ran into when we were putting up our cover trim was we had some time between when we were doing our trim work to when the concrete guys could come back and pour the aprons. And I really didn't want to have that delay. It was probably 3 or 4 weeks, stop me from continuing on with the trim work. And what I did is ran the cover trim to the concrete and then down an inch. So it's actually recessed into the concrete an inch. You know, for better or worse, I think it looks really nice and clean. You don't have any seams here. But I'm just wondering if down the road in 20 years, if that's going to cause any issue for rust from moisture getting in there. So I guess we'll see what comes of that. Hopefully we won't have any problems with moisture getting in there. But you know, I thought it would look really nice to have that nice clean flush in there with the concrete poured. But in hindsight, I guess we'll see. So another tip that I kind of discovered for myself going along is putting up the majority of the sheeting myself. These taller sheets were kind of a challenge to do and not scuff up all the wainscoting trim. So what I ended up doing was taking some of the blue painter's tape and I ran it along this trim. And then I took a couple of washers, the same ones that we used for all the anchor bolts, and I wrapped those in the blue painter's tape too, and I set them on here. on the ribs, one on either end of the panel. So when I went ahead and set the panel up on the wall, I could set it on the tape and those washers to A, prevent it from scratching, and B, I would have my spacing from the panel to the trim in order to let any moisture come out. So again, that was just kind of one of the tips that I picked up or tricks. Probably more helpful if you're doing it by yourself than if you have help to hold the bottom of the panel, especially if you've got a person on the lift up top and somebody on the bottom. But doing it yourself, even with shorter panels, like on the backside under the lean-to, was certainly helpful to have that tape just to help prevent any scratching. So another thing I ran into when the concrete guys were out forming up the perimeter for the foundation, since we did go with a 1-foot stem wall here, all of our anchor bolts for our door openings, the templates did not fit because at least our concrete vendors had a 2x4 board for the forms, and that would not allow you to get your template in there for the anchor bolt. They would have actually had to cut into either their forms or our templates quite a bit, and you wouldn't have been able to get the proper measurements from the doors. So what I ended up doing after the fact, took my same templates, marked them out, and just drilled in the holes with my hammer drill. I sunk those about 3 or 4 inches into the concrete that was already poured, set them in here, and got all my doors in and squared up. And then the concrete guys came back and poured the aprons for all the doors here. So that adds another 4 inches of concrete. And after that had cured, then I went in and put in my washer and nut. If you can see it down in there, maybe not, way down in there. But once all the concrete was in and done and cured, then I ran down my washer and nut to get my doorways in and secured. Now that's secondary framing, so it's not really structural in terms of the building requirements, but I still went ahead and went down about 8 inches into both the stem wall and the door cap itself to make sure we had plenty of concrete around those anchor bolts. Another tip I came across and I reached out to Great Western for was the base trim for the corners. This is a little bit different trim that I'm used to working with, and you can see here was my first corner I did, which was not pretty. It was ugly, and then I reached out to the Great Western guys and says, hey, how can I make this prettier? You know, being a novice, I don't know all the techniques. So they sent over a video of a better way to do it, which I will show you. All right. And here is another corner that I did after watching their little video on YouTube. So what I did, and I'll link the video below, and maybe I'll try and do a little example myself with some leftovers I have. But for the one piece of trim that comes out, I cut this one flush back here, and this piece coming in, I mitered, so we have a nice trimmed out edge here, which actually is not too bad. And then what I did behind, excuse me, what I did behind the piece of corner trim is I drilled in a pop rivet to help keep that secure too. So this ends up being a nice clean edge, and I think looks pretty good. Now the Great Western trim is a little bit heavier duty construction and thickness than a lot of the other steel trims and siding I've worked with in the past. So not all the knowledge I have could be directly applicable, but what I found is on that R&R buildings, a nice way to trim out your corners, with the exception of my scuff, which I have to touch up. But basically, if you cut this in 2 pieces, you can notch up under here, and I'll drop that link below on how to do this. Notch this tucks up under here, and this piece here actually extends up just a little bit to cover. And then when you bring your top piece down, everything overlaps. Of course, your water's running downhill because this is on the outside so you're not going to have any water running behind. But this ends up making a nice clean corner that, if done properly, looks nice. Again, I have another example on another corner that doesn't look so nice. So kind of my opinion on that is, if you're not quite sure what you're doing or how it's going to turn out on your first corner, do it on the corner that nobody's going to see, the farthest one away from the pretty side of the building. And in my case, I did that on the corner where the horses will see most often, because frankly, I don't think they're going to care. And another tip I'm going to suggest, but I think it should be common sense, is if you are having people over to help you, thank them many times. We had 2 weekends here, one in August for the main erection of all the heavier steel and some of the purlins and girts, and then a second weekend in October to get the rest of the roof sheeting on. And both of those weekends, well, the first one was really wet and hot and humid and unpleasant, but we got it done. We all enjoyed a good evening meal up in the garage one afternoon when a pretty severe storm passed and blew our easy up awnings away. You can see those details in one of the earlier segments on this building process. But my point is, just make sure you're thanking your help for coming out. They are taking time away from their family or friends and activities to come out and help you put up your giant building. So I guess that can't be said enough times. So be thankful for the help that does come out and give you the ability to put this up. The task itself of putting up the building, you need to have some skill. But it's just more than 1 or 2 people can do. Granted, I did put up a lot of the sheeting on the sides myself. I knew better than to try and attempt the roofing sheets myself. And then some of the bigger pieces, of course, the main building weekend. You need a group of friends to get this done. Our building was 50 by 80, 16-foot sidewalls, and we had 2 boom lifts, or we had a boom lift and a scissor lift here, as well as a telehandler. And I think there were probably about 10 of us actively working that weekend. A couple folks popped in here and there for various things. So it's not something that you want to do yourself or just with you and your buddy, especially on a building this size. So definitely plan for having at least 6 or 8 people helping you out if you're doing a larger building, and don't expect it's all going to get done in one weekend. So that's probably the other important thing, is make sure your expectations are set correctly. Things happen, weather changes. Our initial forecast for our main weekend was supposed to be, 75 and sunny for 4 days. We ended up with 85 severe thunderstorms and 80% humidity for one of the days, which led to 5 inches of mud to walk around in the next day. So just kind of be sure what your expectations are, and that things may change. Something else that's probably worth mentioning is timetable. We put in the order, I think in our case, for the end of March, I believe, was when we put in our order. And our building was delivered the middle of June. So there is about an 8 to 10 week build time, at least when we put up our building. Of course, as times change, your delivery dates may change. We had our building delivered in June, even reaching out to the folks to do our groundwork and our concrete work. We didn't get that done until the beginning of July. I think July 6th, my birthday, we started doing the pouring and forming for the foundation. And then that meant we had about 3 weeks before we could start erecting the building itself. So we ended up with an erection weekend of, I think, August 9th, something like that. And we got a lot done that weekend, but I pretty much worked every day after work, in the evenings, on weekends, to get the rest of the building sheeted, the purlins and girts up that still needed to be put in, as well as all the other stuff that goes along with the building. And if you are trying to put up the building and you're married, thank your spouse for taking care of what you can't. This would not have been possible without my wife being able to mind after the kids in the evening when I was out here working till 9 o'clock to get this thing done. So again, it goes back to thanking everybody involved, including your vendors, your friends, and your spouse. So during our process, during the whole building here this summer, we had some folks ask us why we went with the steel building instead of a traditional wooden post frame building. And you know, we had looked for about 3 years. Tristan and I had gone to various horse expos, looked up things online, and just made some comparisons between the options for wood buildings versus steel. And eventually we came to the conclusion that for us, steel was the right option. One of the big things for us was not having the roof trusses and A-frame inside with the ceiling in it or limited height. So in our building, since we do have everything open inside, I think it's about 24 feet at the peak. So we were able to run our garage doors up the pitch of the roof and just not have any obstructions anywhere inside the building. So we were really happy with the flexibility and design options we had with Great Western. While we did have the wraparound porch in our specifications from the very beginning, whether we went with wood or steel, the addition of the lean-to in the back was sort of a last-minute addition. Going with the steel frame construction, we were able to have that 1-foot stem wall around the perimeter of the building, which we were looking for. That'll just help us keep out moisture and critters from getting in the building. Up here in Minnesota, we do have some heavy snowfalls, especially towards the spring. A lot of it can be wet. And in the last couple of years, we've had and seen a number of wooden buildings collapse under the weight of the snow load, both newer construction and older buildings. And we feel going with the steel construction, we would not run into that problem at all with the snow or pretty much any other storms that we had. I think one of the big factors for me personally, since I was going to be erecting the building, was the ease of construction. All the parts came pre-drilled, pre-cut, and the instructions were all very well detailed. So I didn't have to, spend a lot of time cutting my purlins and girts and measuring everything and getting those things all lined up and level. Everything was, by and large, level, cut to fit, trim to fit, and went together pretty much just like a giant erector set for adults. We felt the quality of the building was top-notch. As I mentioned before, everything came pretty much perfect. We didn't have to drill or open up any of our holes for our columns or beams to make things fit. Everything just dropped right in place. All the parts, all the trim, the sheeting, all was very, very heavy gauge. Didn't seem flimsy or cheap or anything like that. So I think going with the steel construction, we did get a heavier gauge panel for our sheeting and also the trim. So that I think also is going to help add to additional strength of the building. I think one of the benefits you can have from putting up the building yourself, if you have that ability and opportunity, is you get to touch pretty much every part on that building. Short of the roofing sheeting, I think I touched at one point in time every other nut and bolt on the building, whether it was during the initial erection weekend or going around to tighten everything up after and making final adjustments. I feel doing it yourself, you get that A, satisfaction of a job well done, and B, the job is done well. And if something is not done right, well, it's just you to blame, or in my case, me. So I think doing it yourself is a great experience. At least it was for me. There were a few times not really frustrated, just kind of became, I have more sheeting or more trim. But at the end result, I can look at this building behind me and say, I built that. I think that's, for someone who's not a construction person by trade, I'm a computer person. I was able to put this building together, and I feel that's a pretty decent accomplishment. I felt that Eric and the team at Great Western do a great job of support, both from pre-sales all the way to now. Going through the design phase, getting all of our revisions and little things added in at the last moment. Their support there was great. Any of our questions we had during the building process, whether it was trim questions, sheeting, where this random part goes, They were always there either by phone or email to answer those questions for us, and I felt they just went the extra mile to make sure that we were successful in our project. There was one item we started putting on the gutter straps, and the plans called for one strap every third rib on the roof. And one weekend we had a couple of inches of snow, kind of wet stuff, and I noticed a few of the straps were starting to bend, and I went ahead and got a hold of Eric and showed him, and he said, well, we'll send you out some more straps for your gutters. Those arrived, I got the rest of them on, and now we have one strap every rib versus every 3 ribs. So I really am not concerned that those gutters are going to bend or fail. So again, I feel that, you know, Great Western does what it takes to make it right. So at the end of the day, you're happy with your building. You know, overall, I feel this has been a really great experience. You know, I've said before, I'll say it again, I'm not a skilled construction person. I've never erected a building of this size before. But for me, the process, you know, I've had some experience helping with other pole sheds, whether it's been siding or repairing them, or putting up our little loafing shed for the horses, but nothing this large. But I felt the plans that you get are very well laid out, and B, being able to contact the team at Great Western and say, hey, I've got a question, and them being able to answer that for you. I feel that if you've got a basic understanding of tools and how to read plans, and especially if you've played with an erector set as a kid, you can certainly put up one of these buildings. So I certainly hope you've enjoyed watching us put up our building here this summer, and we are going to get back to working on vehicles here come in the next couple of weeks, so please stay tuned for those videos, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe and hit the like button below, and of course share with your friends. Thanks again, and we will see you in the next video. Stay safe.